Hi everyone, my name is Helen Baulch. I'm here to pitch work on water quality solutions related to the issue of toxic algal blooms. I'm at the University of Saskatchewan and I work in the School of Environment and Sustainability and the Global Institute for Water Security, where I work on understanding nutrient cycling, lakes, and options to manage blooms. Okay, so as you likely know, blooms are a massive issue across many lakes in Western Canada and around the world. Many of you will have seen lakes that look like these or photos like these of blooms affecting lakes. Within the water of lakes, there are a diverse group of organisms growing in the water column, the phytoplankton, or what we often call algae. And under certain conditions, the algae in the water column can bloom, like we see here, or undergo rapid increases to really, really dense conditions. Blooms of algae as a whole can be worrisome with ecological effects, like contributing to low oxygen conditions and fish kills. Blooms can also be toxic. In fresh waters, this is associated with cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae. These cyanobacteria are present naturally, usually in low abundance, but under the right conditions, when they bloom, the potential for toxicity becomes particularly worrisome. Now, without a microscope or molecular analyses, we can't be sure of the species here, and without further tests, we can't know if the bloom is toxic. But in each of these cases, there's reason for concern associated with the bloom having ecological effects and perhaps health effects. So what conditions lead to blooms? Well, two key factors are associated with increased bloom risk, and these are high nutrients and warm waters. And these are exactly the conditions we're fostering as we increase nutrient loads in warmer climate. Other factors such as low wind conditions and changes in mixing can also influence blooms. So where do these extra nutrients that help cause blooms come from? Well, nutrient pollution has been on the increase for decades, associated with both runoff from agriculture to grow our food and runoff from cities where sewage, for example, can be an important nutrient source. So higher nutrient loads combined with warmer water temperatures can increase bloom risk. And that means we see blooms frequently now in the summer. And that's exactly when we want to be at the lake. Without solutions, we should anticipate this problem will get significantly worse. There are other factors too that affect the risk of blooms. These include factors controlling how much a lake mixes, how long the water stays in a lake before being flushed out, as well as whether oxygen remains at the sediments, the pH of a system, light, and many other factors that influence how likely a bloom is to occur and which species become dominant. Unfortunately, once a bloom has occurred, we also know that another may come because the conditions associated with blooms like low oxygen can help hasten nutrient release and future blooms. That makes this a hard problem to solve once we have it. They can be, in a way, self-reinforcing year to year if we don't intervene. The good news is there are examples of interventions that have helped, reducing nutrient loads in the watershed, applying chemicals to keep nutrients in the sediment, or solving oxygen problems by injecting oxygen. Now, we know that diverse species can cause blooms, including diverse species of cyanobacteria. And I've mentioned this, but I want to reemphasize this. There are many species of cyanobacteria. Some can produce toxins and some cannot. Even those that can produce toxins don't always. There are strains that can and can't, and conditions under which they do and don't. And of course, even if they are producing toxins, they're not always at high enough concentrations to impact the health of humans and other animals. So looking at an image and knowing whether a bloom is toxic is impossible. As a result, when we see a bloom for now, we need to assume that it's potentially toxic. So predicting toxicity is challenging. And we need to also consider the fact that there's a suite of toxins that cyanobacteria can produce. Some species can produce multiple toxins, all of which can impact health. We often only test for the most common toxin, which is microcystin, but there are many others that can be found if we test more broadly. So knowing whether the water is toxic is hard, and knowing which cyanobacteria is causing the problem can also be challenging. Getting a good sample to understand the risk is another challenge. Blooms can be extremely patchy in space, as can toxins. So toxicity can vary over the course of tens of meters and over the course of hours. That leaves us in a really perplexing situation. If we can't tell if the water is toxic, and the answer is it depends, and test results take time, basically, we have to recommend a precautionary approach of staying away from and not using the water when blooms are occurring. When we're using bloom-affected surface waters for drinking water supplies, though, we really have to be sure to test for and remove the toxins. So blooms are a massively important issue. They cost many millions of dollars a year because they impede our use of lakes, making recreational uses unsafe for periods of time, and also increasing costs for drinking water treatment. And we know they can impact drinking water safety, as we saw in the crisis in Toledo several years ago. So what's the bottom line? Here you have it. Warming and increased nutrient loads have led to major increases in bloom risks. And these blooms can be formed by any one or a mix of a large number of species. They can have a variety of negative impacts on an ecosystem, and some of them, associated with cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, can be toxic. This toxicity is very difficult to predict. You can test, but then you need to ask if you're only concerned about microcystin, which tends to be the most common, or whether you're concerned about other toxins, and then you have to wait for results. And you have to account for the fact that these toxins and toxicity can vary in time and space. Now, you can be exposed to toxins by your skin, by drinking water, and by breathing. You can also be exposed by certain foods or supplements, so there's lots of reason we need to be careful. The bottom line is you can solve toxicity issues if you can solve blooms. And we can also manage blooms much better than we do today. These are big water challenges with lots and lots of opportunity and need for solutions across the many bloom-affected lakes. So that leaves your challenge. How can we better manage the risk of toxic algal blooms? There are lots of ways you can contribute. We need to reduce the incidence of blooms and manage them when we do occur. We need to understand the risk, communicate the risk, test for toxins, and remove toxins from treated waters. This is a global problem and a big problem in parts of Western Canada, so there's lots of room and opportunity for your solutions. We know this is a hard problem and a widespread problem, so these resources will help you get started, including some from Canada and some from around the world. Thanks for taking part in working on this important issue. I look forward to seeing your solutions.